Hello and welcome to Dale Schafer Law Chats, a candid conversation with industry professionals on complex legal and business issues in the cannabis industry. I'm Heather Schafer, legal assistant of the Law Office of Dale Schafer and CEO of Agora Business Services. And you all know Dale Schafer, a two-decade California cannabis attorney with a current focus on cannabis business law. Today, we are chatting with Attorney Dana Cisneros of Cannabis Corporate Law Firm. Dana, please tell us a little bit about you and your law firm.
So I have been practicing in the cannabis space for about 3 years. Formerly, I was a business and real estate attorney. I have all kinds of different business and litigation experience on the civil side. So we've done a lot of collections in my life, or in my career, I should say, over the past 13 years. I'm used to securing assets, dealing with transfers of assets. I've worked with a lot of receivers. There was a period of about a year or so that I worked at a firm that exclusively represented large financial institutions and also in foreclosure proceedings, as well as finding receivers before someone gets to bankruptcy or foreclosure setting. So Dale reached out and asked whether I would come on and chat with him about receivers, toxic assets, how we can secure collateral within agreements and things like that. So I'm excited.
Okay, so for those of us who are watching who don't know what a toxic business asset is, can you explain that for us, Dana?
Yeah, I mean, it's an asset that is underperforming and that the business needs to sort of cut loose or give someone else control of so that they can manage it.
Perfect. Okay. So what is your experience with, what have you seen in the industry with toxic business assets?
1 second.
And this is the way. Okay.
This is Zoom. I got 5 grandkids outside the door waiting for me to come out and finish cupcakes.
I don't know if you guys heard what he said, though.
That's okay.
It's real.
What's been your experience with toxic business assets?
In the cannabis setting, luckily, I've not come across them just yet. Previously, I think that's where we used receivers to come in. Essentially, when we use receivers, there's a recognition that the business owners or operators are not functioning well within their capacity or within their environment. So we need an expert to come in and run the business. And that can mean, it can look like a number of different things. It can mean that they're there and it's a property management company and they're collecting rents. It can mean that they need to come in and make sure that the lab is running properly, that, maybe there's compliance issues, or maybe there's issues with staff. Maybe there's, compensation levels that are being set too high. Things like that. So the receiver will come in and essentially seize control of the business. I think it's important for everyone to remember that the receiver is essentially a friend-ish of the creditor, but serves at the pleasure of the court. So the receiver is appointed by the court. The receiver reports to the court. So even though the creditors, who are typically our clients, right, are going to be the ones paying those fees, ultimately, the receiver is answering to a different boss. And it's not the client, it's the court. Luckily, the courts usually take, in my experience, they take a very narrow approach and read contracts and give, a lot of leeway to those secured lenders in terms of what the receiver can do. And sometimes that means the receiver has to sell off assets, right? I think it happened to Guild San Jose, the dispensary, not the brand, but the dispensary. And I think their guys actually walked away with some money in their pocket where they were, I believe, previously running it into the ground. So that probably was helpful for them. This brings up issues, though, for us in cannabis, because who knows how to run a business really well, knows accounting and legal compliance and the practical side of everything. It can actually come in and successfully, for example, run a Type 7 lab. I doubt I could. I'd probably hire someone to help me, but I don't think I could do that myself. And so, so that's a tricky situation for the receivers. You know, and then of course there's like licensing issues and things like that they're walking right into. They're walking straight into liability scenarios.
Well, one of the things that got my attention was a suit filed by a creditor of MedMen, and they filed a breach of guarantee and a debt relief action. And when I read the complaint, I couldn't help but have my eyebrows go up that you gave these people how much money, and you didn't get the deed in your hand before you gave it to them. And I'm thinking about a ship that's sinking, and somebody wants to try and take some of the cargo out, hoping it's not going to sink before you get the cargo out, and now your snorkel's on and you're underwater. What do you do at that point? And I have some clients and some people that have come to me that I've referred to litigators that had even worse stories, where the business had been running the ground to such a point that the shareholders now were going to have to step up and take over. And within that situation, they were also equity, and they took instruments back. And so they had some fiduciary responsibilities to the corporation themselves. They were creditors, but they weren't an outside creditor. They were an inside creditor. And one guy, when I told him that there's no bankruptcy protection, and because there's no corporate governance, you may not have a corporate veil, the thought that his personal assets were in jeopardy shocked him. And we're talking people who put multiple hundreds, if not millions, thousands, not $1 million into a business, and then just weren't aware what was going on. And they were a shareholder. They had a right to, ask questions, to demand things. And I'm just wondering if you're seeing out there in the cannabis industry businesses that are that poorly run or that poorly structured, and on top of just having assets they can't service or creditors they can't pay.
So what I'm finding is that, well, first of all, I am forming most of my clients as LLCs, which lightens the burden for corporate formalities on them. Most of them have multiple managers on their LLC. So for those that might be watching that aren't familiar with the terminology, most people are familiar with corporate terminology. So we have shareholders and board of directors and officers. Shareholders elect the board and the board appoints officers. And that's how companies run if it's structured as a corporation. For limited liability companies, we have members and managers call the shots, and the members sit like shareholders and basically they vote on really important issues, and they're limited in their role of the company. So my managers are I just lost my train of thought. I got off on the issue of the corporate similarities. What did you ask?
Well, we're talking about corporate governance or LLC governance.
Oh, right. So when you have multiple managers, it tends to lead itself to a small group of people at the top communicating frequently about decisions being made within the company. And so I've found that oftentimes my clients will come in and we'll be talking about one thing, and then they'll bring up something else and they'll just say it in passing. And I'm like, wait, what? What did you do? Hold on. Did you have a meeting? Did you vote about that? And then we end up having to kind of backtrack. But we used a lot of, I give them resolutions that they're really simple to fill out. Or they just let me know something happened. And I'll draft up the minutes for them or something like that. So there is a way to go back and recreate that. It's tedious, but I've been in the corporate and business side of being a lawyer for 13 years. So it's something that we do often. But it's going to be impossible to sell your company if your books aren't clean.
Well, and one of the things I've been asked to look at when these troubled assets get presented to an investor group I work with, is top to bottom. Was this well thought out when it was put together? Was it well run? As sort of the first questions, because if it's a C corp and it's not run well, then you've got serious problems about protecting people's assets. But then going down from the top down, with intellectual property rights, with HR, with contracts and things like that. Are you doing any reviews like that? And if you are, what kind of things are you seeing in companies that are having some trouble?
So I draft most of the executive compensation agreements for my clients, because those are usually negotiated where those folks at the top are bright enough to have their own legal counsel as they come into the mix, which I think is a good call. It's smart of them. Like I was pretty shocked that the last one I did involved a lead cultivator, which some people call a master grower, and then other people cringe when you say that word. But he had legal counsel who came and he showed up and he fought pretty hard to get his client what he wanted. So I think that's important because, you know, I think that the guys who are guys like the lead cultivators, they're putting their blood, sweat, and tears into these companies. And I get that they didn't put the money in, but I also think that the money guys are learning that it's not as easy as they thought it was to make a profitable company. I think a lot of them thought if I buy the fancy equipment and the right genetics, this shit will grow itself and it'll be fine. Yeah. And they realize that that's not happening. And now they're having to go and find experts who know what they're doing. And those guys are now hip to the fact that they're in high demand. So, which is fine. This is how it should be. This is how it is in business. But we were talking about toxic or distressed assets. Things I think that companies can do. I just saw today that the California Distribution Association, that is the Association of Cannabis Distributors, either they have or are getting ready to, and I'm not sure if it's publicly or within their organization, but they're getting ready to make a blacklist.
Yeah, I saw that.
Paying their bills. Which is true. It's crazy. I mean, even still, I'm still surprised to this day that distributors are still giving product to retailers on consignment. And I use the word consignment because that's what it's called. And people look at me like, no, it's not like that. And I'm like, what do you call it when you give someone something and they don't pay for it until it's sold off their shelf? Like, that's exactly what it is. And so they are, you know, that's a tough one for them because the retailers are used to that. And how can you, there's no product outlet if you don't use the retailers, especially down here. We have so few.
Yeah.
I don't know how many you guys have up there. I'm in Orange County and there are 30 licenses, but I don't believe they're all operating. I think there's 22 in all of Orange County. We
have 30 in Sacramento.
Yeah.
And I think there's 5 now in El Dorado. There's 3 more going in Placerville, 1 in South Lake Tahoe, and deliveries coming in. So we have, you know, coverage. The problem is that distributors are just not that friendly to the cultivators right now, up here especially.
Really?
They lean on them to get the cheapest price they can, and then the cultivator has to wait until it goes out to the retailer on consignment before they get paid. In the meantime, they're hooked for cultivation taxes, and you know, there's a lot of things that when I sat down and explained to them the supply chain, and like, here's the taxable event when the COA and quality assurance is done. That's when the CDTFA knows you owe money. It's in metric. And if you're waiting too long, where down the line are you going to get paid so you can actually pay what the CDTFA shows up and wants to collect? And there's a lot of people that owe money that don't have money in their pockets that haven't been paid, and so they can't pay until they're paid.
Yeah, and so that was the other thing that is just, I think, is crazy that this industry is doing that literally does not exist outside of this industry. It's, in my experience, I've never seen it. I talked to my dad, who's been a GM or president of a company his whole life, and he said he thinks it's crazy too. He only seen it slightly in advertising, but where someone owes you money on consignment, doesn't pay you, places a new order, and then tells you, you have to fill this order so I can sell the product so I can pay you for both the past due balance and the current. And I'm like, bonkers, that's like fool me once, shame on me, shame on me. And they keep doing it. And I'm just like, what the, who keeps bringing them fucking product? Like, how does that happen?
Well, the Bay Area is really rich in numbers of dispensaries. And when you start talking to people that have been producing and moving their product in them, they start screaming, they're not paying us. And then George Zimmer loaned almost $1 million to a group, and that group then moved that money around, shape, change the names it went to, and had somebody else paying the debt, and that person didn't pay the debt. And so Zimmer's like, well, you owe me money. And the next thing you know, they're doing 3 or 4 kangaroo jumps to who is actually paying it. And in between was the shell game of these old nonprofit mutual benefits that you can't buy and sell, but people did anyway. And that one was another disaster that's going to unravel up here, because cultivators are on the hook for taxes and they don't have the money, they haven't been paid. And the people who owe them are claiming they're poor as a church mouse, so they go wait for somebody else to pay them so they can service it. That money went somewhere. And we're not talking about $100,000, we're talking about millions of dollars that's owed.
So one of the things that I tell my distributors is, if they're gonna not take my advice, not sell on consignment, for the love of God, collect the tax. Like, even if you're not going to collect the purchase price, because it's, and you know this being a lawyer, it's one thing to put your time and effort out there. It's another thing to dig into your own pocket and have to come up with money. So it's one thing for the distributor to be pushing product they already own to somebody and be collecting on that. It's another thing to go into their pocket and have to cover the excise tax for the retailer because they've not been doing that. So I tell them all, if you're going to sell on contingency, you need to sell on contingency, but you have to collect the excise tax, or your ass is going to get stuck holding the bag at the end of the day. Also, Dale, backing up. So are you saying that your cultivators are left holding the bag because the distributors are the ones that pay the cultivation tax, but the cultivator is not relieved of the obligation until they transfer it to someone?
Well, the understanding that the cultivators have is that they're on the hook unless the distributor takes them off the hook and agrees to assume that burden. And that happens in a lot of these contracts. But when the cultivator passes the tax on to the distributor and then the distributor doesn't pay it, then the piece of paper, you have to go in and argue to the CDTFA that, look, they took the responsibility, and they're not even backing this up with paper. It's handshakes. It's written sort of subtly into a transfer contract from a cultivator to a manufacturer that, oh, we'll account for the taxes. Oh, by the way, we're going to trim. And that's another one of those games that I don't know what to do with that, because the state has an app to tell you so much whole flower should have so much trim. But if you go trim it and account for it, and they show up and ask you, do you have a processor's license? It just gets muddier because they're thinking, oh, I'm an independent contractor and do it. And you go, well, back up. At what level do we have to talk about how that's illegal to do? And I've done some mediation and some expert work now trying to unravel these things. And every place you look is another shithole that you fall into, that people got creative and did things they weren't supposed to do. And now there's hundreds of thousands of dollars of tax due. And the CDTFA's looking, and the IRS now has also sent out the smoke signal. We're going to look at you guys too, because we think you're all cheating on your IRS taxes. And who's going to have to pay that? Because the tax guy is who put Capone in Alcatraz. You could murder all you want, but you don't pay your taxes, you're going to prison. And that's some of the problems I'm having with these operators, because they have collected tax money, or they should have, and they've contractually obligated to be responsible for it, but no one has the money to pay it. That's a toxic asset as far as I'm concerned, because I call them shit sandwiches. How do you make this thing taste like peanut butter and jelly? I don't know. I try to get creative, but that's a tough one.
Yeah, I'm glancing over at the CDTFA's tax guide, and all of it is confirming that it's the responsibility is transferred to the cultivator. Possibly it's asking for the invoice. It's saying that your invoice will reflect that you paid the cultivation tax, but tax because you haven't paid. No, the distributor pays the cultivation tax.
Well, they're the ones that actually pay it to the CDTFA, but the responsibility is on the cultivator unless you pass it along. And they didn't really tell us the form to use to assure the cultivator that I'm going to pay the taxes out of this. And they're not really holding money back. There's a lot of other sub issues that go along with it. The last case I handled like this, I think it was an illegal contract to buy whole flower and then have a distributor trim it and account for the taxes. You know, beyond that, then pounds, multiple pounds went out the back door. We've got a manifest that took it in at X amount. And when you go do the counting of the pounds, there's like at least 50 pounds missing. And when you ask the questions, it's like, well, you start reading the text message and they tell you in text messages how stupid they are because they're making the deal to take it out the side door. And now they wanted my client, who was a cultivator, to be responsible for taxes. And I said, that's cool, but he won't lie for you. So you take responsibility, because they show up at my guy's house. We're going to have a criminal attorney sitting there with us, and it's going right back on you, dude. So, and that wasn't even a big one, but that's that's another toxic or troubled asset along the way. Flower went someplace. It got moved out to the marketplace. Everybody owes everybody for it, but very few have been paid. And we have a lot of cultivation up here, so that's a predominant problem in the cultivation environment. I don't have an answer for them.
It's so interesting that the distributors are like taking advantage of the cultivators like that.
They wouldn't do that, would they? Well, I have a cultivation client that we had a meeting with before you and I chatted, and they want to know how they can get into a good position with a distributor that they don't have to pay the 30% and the distributor markets for them. They can go sell it right to a retailer and hire a distributor on a fee-for-service basis because they're tired of getting screwed. And I don't know who's doing that in the distributor world.
You can just look it up.
Well, but not everybody wants to share that information. And when I actually get into a case,
licenses, I think if you reached out to the distribution association, I think they probably would be able to put you or your clients in touch with a number of distributors that are just in the transport game. They're not in the sales game. They're just in the transport game.
Well, these guys have their own transport only licenses. So they need someone to do the quality assurance. And then from there, it can go out in the market, but they want to pre-sell it to the dispensaries and just have somebody do. So it's another whole, future conversation we can have about how the supply chain is going to come back to life. But it's all the money that's owed right now, and how do you collect that? That is still a tough nut for me to wrap my head around when you.
Yeah, and it's hard too because the state took such a relaxed approach to implementing metric that it's like impossible to convince the clients that it's a real thing, because they're like, no, we're not going on metric. No, it's making us, we're not doing. I mean, how many emails did we get last year threatening to lose licenses? I think they started in October, and then finally and then they did suspend some folks, but those were the people that didn't complete the training, not that didn't complete the training. And then March 3rd came for having everything tagged and into metric. And that was pulling teeth for half my clients. I'm like, what are you doing all this time?
Yeah.
Like, why do you want a paper manifest? That's bullshit. Use the computer. Like, stop.
Yeah.
Well, now I think metric is going to turn off their function to create a new package unless you can track it back to the batch it came from.
They did. Yeah, they already did it. That's my understanding.
Yeah. Well, people's hair were on fire about that.
The state needs to get rid of metric. It's a piece of trash.
Well, every computer system they ever put online was a piece of crap. Every one of them.
It's like really bad though, and their customer service is exceptionally poor. It took me over 2 weeks and 60 emails to explain to them that the majority interest holder of my client was not me.
Did you send them a picture too?
Oh my goodness.
I'm like, they're like, we need Mrs. Jones, that's not her name, but we need Mrs. Jones to tell us that her email address is not Dana@CannabisCorpLaw.com. And I'm like, well, I'm Dana, and that's my email address. So you don't need Mrs. X or Jones to tell you that, because I care, because it's mine.
Yeah.
And she would not take that as an answer.
Oh my God.
We had to get supervisors from CFA involved to call Metric for us. I shit you not. I went back and counted one day. There were over 60 emails about this is my, and then Mrs. Jones, meantime, has jumped in the mix and is like, this is my email. That is my lawyer's email. I am not my own lawyer. Dina is my lawyer. Like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
And all of this because she couldn't credential, because the email address was tied to the primary contact on the license application with Cal Cannabis. And so I happened to know someone at Acela, and so I emailed Cal Cannabis and Acela at the same time, and I was like, hey, could you add a box next to the owner's names so that people could check the box of the human that they want to be their Metric account manager?
Thank
and
you.
then reports to Metric, because also the majority shareholder of that company doesn't run it.
Yeah.
Right.
She doesn't want shit to do with it. She's got 2 kids at home, and she just is the majority shareholder. She has other people make this company for her that deal with all of that. And so like, she doesn't want to do Metric training for 2 hours. And what good does that do anyone when she's not in operations for the company anyways? Like, why shouldn't the business be able to select the appropriate person? Like, Dale, say me and you go into business together, and I'm really good at marketing and you're really good at operations. Why in the hell would the marketing person be the person who controls the metric
system? Yeah.
Why not let the business pick who's the best? And if Acela emails me right back, oh yeah, we can totally do that, no problem.
Oh my God. Well, I don't have an answer for that screwed up governmental system, and at some point it's going to crash. And this industry doesn't have enough players in it yet to really test Metric, because it's falling backwards. It's losing ground. And we were all expecting it to blow up like it did in Maryland as soon as it went live, because Orange County is bigger than Maryland, population and geographically. We haven't seen it yet, but the computer geeks that are talking to me are just waiting. And when they come back, perhaps some of these POS systems can actually talk seamlessly from I make an order for X number of clones in a batch all the way to the end without having 50 people put garbage in, garbage out, fuck up your inventory, have discrepancies because it was just a person who transposed a number. I don't know how we fix that yet. I'm working with a computer geek guy, and he doesn't do cannabis at all.
One of my clients hired someone, and they wrote a system for them and have already gotten it approved with Metric. They wrote their own API to function the way they want it to function. Mm-hmm. That works for their business, which I think is brilliant.
Absolutely.
That client is exceptional at finding the right, most talented people. I need to know how he does it because I need some of that.
My family owned liquor stores when I was growing up, and they had a system where when you placed an order, everyone got notified, and you tracked it through the system. And when it showed up, everything was done. You didn't have to do all this stupid garbage in between. And every business type in cannabis has a different point of piece of shit. The POS, I call them piece of shit, because you've got to have a human look at it, because you can't trust that it's going to actually do what you need it to do. And then you start asking, well, why do you have the computer system if the human's got to keep doing it? Which, obviously we're in the computer age. But if you get a discrepancy, you have to notify it. The cost for that alone is worth calling up Microsoft or go borrow someone in Silicon Valley and have them sit down, smoke a joint, and write the goddamn app for this and make it work. Because Meadow did this.
Like I said, that's exactly what my client did, because they weren't seeing the right. So I kept sending them different solutions for other clients who were already at market that, what they were using. A big one that a lot of my clients like is Cannabis 365, I think it's called. Cannabis, one of the two, but they like it because it's easy to use. It's super user friendly. I guess the interface looks like Microsoft. It integrates with Microsoft. It integrates with integrates with QuickBooks. It integrates with Metric. It does all of the things that they need it to do. So a lot of my clients use that program. My retailers like Indica. A couple of my retailers use Indica online, but I don't know if it's their favorite or not. I can't tell. Everyone's calling coaches. I know there was a huge issue too, where when the excise tax, the base average market price calculation changed from 60 to 80%. The POS systems at retail just redid the calculation and moved everything over to 80%. That's actually not accurate. If the retailer had received it prior to January 1st, it stays at 60%.
Oh.
Are you having any discussions with your clients about coming out of this COVID and what's going to have to be done to reopen and how that's going to look?
None of my clients are closed.
Well, but we've got people asking. The Cal OSHA put out recommendations for what happens when you come back online. David Hua from Meadows put out a distributors. Here's our suggested PPEs for inside the business. If you're employee to employee, if you're going out to the customers, what other things you might want to do? How do you get testing? You have it now, or you got serology testing?
So LA has a resource. They have a check the box form that needs to be posted inside the facility that explains in detail what the workers are entitled to, what the public is entitled to, those kind of things, to put everybody on notice. So LA has implemented that, and it's now mandatory. So LA has a resource for that. CDFA keeps emailing us every couple days, lists of vendors that have PPE available, so the protective equipment, who has it, and where they can buy it, and they keep updating every couple of days because they're working directly, I guess, with whatever the stockpiles are, to release that equipment and those masks and hand sanitizers and stuff like that. I was thinking about it. Our manufacturers are probably in pretty good shape. They always have solvents around, different kinds of solvents. So, I don't see, nobody's come to me about the COVID issue really, because the retailers are just like cleaning up right now because everyone's at home getting stoned and drinking, and school teachers and shit, so
it's California, right?
The retailer, it was shitty too because it was down here. We're so spoiled, right? Like right now it's so nice out. We have the pool heater on. We'll go swimming on a nose call, and it's so nice out right now. It's like 87 or something.
Oh my gosh.
But last week it was pouring ass rain, and the week, like this whole time we've been locked inside. It's been ugly and dreary and dark and raining and gloomy and horrible, and now the sun's out and everyone's happy. But
I got 5 grandkids want me to go out in front and watch them ride their bikes and stuff. So, and it's nice up here. But last week we still have snow up in the mountains. I'm up at about 1,500 feet. My son lives at 4,000 feet, and the snow just.
Oh, I see it behind you.
Yeah,
well, sort of.
That's Yosemite. Yeah, we actually have pine trees up here and things like that. Okay, so I thank you so much for chatting with us. We could go on all day, but you need to get in the pool, and we all need to go on to the next phase of things. So thank you. And I would like to check.
I want to add something, if I can.
Yeah.
We didn't get to this point, but we had talked before we started recording about how to secure collateral. So yes. I have been recording UCC ones with the Secretary of State. I don't know that everyone knows that's a thing. My clients have not yet taken me up on it, but I have offered to even train their staff to do it because it's very simple. And $5. And so, and it's online. It's UCC Connect. I think it's like somewhere linked in the Secretary of State's office. If you search California UCC 1 or UCC, It'll come up on Google. And so we can use that, provided that there's an agreement that allows for securing that property. So we look at collateral in two different ways. One is if it's say it's a client that sold equipment to someone, that's really straightforward and easy. We're putting a UCC1 against that equipment with a serial number on it. That's that specific equipment to tell the entire world that's ours. And should something happen, should that equipment not be paid in full, we have the refund or claim and delivery process. Similar to repossession, I think is probably the thing that like most people are most familiar with is vehicle repossession. So similar in nature to that. I have done 2 of those the last 6 months, where we've had to actually go into court, get rid of possession, and hire the sheriff to go get the equipment. So it's like not a joke. And I can't for the life of me understand why the lawyers on the other side are letting their clients do this and are not explaining to them, you stupid fool, do not let the fucking sheriff in your facility right now. And I'm literally saying this to them in letters, like, we really don't want to have to get the law says that if I get an order, I have to hire the sheriff. I can't hire someone else. So I have to go get the sheriff to come into your facility, and nobody wants the sheriff in their facility. And they're friends with the narcotics guys. They told me straight up if they see something wrong, they're telling their buddies at the city narcotics offices that they're there. And then it's plain view because the sheriff was already there for a court order. They're running even anything remotely illegal. And both times it's come down to butane equipment in a non-volatile lab.
Ooh.
Whoops.
Well,
Whoops. Yeah.
Heather and I were in a facility when they came to inspect, and they didn't have a non-operational permit. They were winterizing and making sauce, and the machine was dirty. It was all over the place, and they're taking pictures. And the guy's like, we didn't do anything in here. Really? They got a picture, dude.
Yeah.
Would your mama drop you on your head a lot when you were a child, or what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know some of these people really have to wonder if they had an attorney involved, what do they do for you? And if not, then put the vape pen down before you make a decision.
Yeah, so those UCC1s are helpful. Not only do they put the world on notice in case anybody gets a bright idea to sell it or try to transfer it, because that, I believe, defeats bona fide purchaser for value since the world is on notice, right? Just like a deed recorded in your house, right? And so there's that. Also, in the event that bankruptcy does become available to cannabis businesses, it will place those creditors in a senior and position by virtue of the secured collateral. So that you will not be able to sell that asset and bring it into the estate because you have priority. I've even now started, when it's appropriate, using, and this will be a buzzword from law school, but the purchase money security instrument. So that's the PMSI when we, or security interest instrument, I should say. So that's when you use the money that the lender has given you to acquire a specific product. And so that's, so like your car, that's a purchase money security interest. The bank is giving you money for the purchase of that vehicle. That gets super priority because without that loan, that vehicle wouldn't exist. That title wouldn't be made. And
Right.
So I am insistent that we use those instruments to secure collateral when real estate's not available. Other creative things we've done is, obviously we use personal guarantees all the time. I've recently done a couple corporate guarantees. So we'll have a business that expands, and an investor comes in and will want some kind of security. So we'll have this business that's expanding, and we'll agree to a lien on 40% of the revenues of the existing business, or something along those lines. So we're coming up with, and everybody likes that because it also alleviates the burden on the personal assets of the individuals behind the company, but it makes the investors feel okay. So and then we can also tack on the proceeds, depending on the situation, what type of loan, we can also tack on the proceeds of sale. We can tack on inventory and things like that. So there's a lot of ways to extend protections to cannabis companies. I was super excited to talk to you about this though, because One of my close girlfriends actually works for a collections division for a dental firm, which she's now furloughed and likely laid off because none of us think that collections are going to be viable, at least for a year, if not two, given what's taken place. And these are small consumer debts. These are people that can't pay off their root canal, you know.
$1,000, yeah.
She was looking at the cannabis space and collections, and she's like, do you think that that's a thing? And I'm like, I think it's totally a thing. I think it's a really big deal right now. And I think having folks that know the FDCPA and the Rosenthal Act in California, and you know, all of those debt collection practices, rules and regulations, like California's strict. Even we count as lawyers as debt collectors. And so, but having companies that specialize in that will be important. It's going to be interesting, right? Because we're coming from an environment where people didn't sue each other.
Not anymore. Not anymore. And what fascinates me is if you take a look at how it's collected, I like to back up from there and put the instrument together, knowing that if something goes wrong, it's going to be easier to go collect. And that's a discussion I'd like to have with you, maybe in another call, because this is, you know, the assets that are difficult to collect. When people lose their ass, the next time they come to you and you can explain to them to secure that asset, here's the tools that you can make use of. This is the toolbox. Here's what you should do. Why one thing's better than another for a different type of asset. And so I'd like to pick your brain a bit about that, if that would be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have people come to me all the time and ask me about it. I mean, but really the number one protection that anyone can have is cash on delivery, cash on sale. Like, consignment shit. And if you can't, because I get it, because the retailers run the chain. Like, I get it. They have slotting agreements. Your product, the fucking light of day, their budget, I get it. But at least require payment of the excise tax.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, if you can't get the full amount, don't go into your pocket though. Like, you just, the part that's that's where businesses are going to start. I just freaked out because one of my clients called me, and not to get into the details too much, but one of their clients was supposed to have a loan funded, and the money was supposed to go directly to my client. And the lender is calling a default on the borrower. Borrower called my client. My client's like, I never got the money. The lender doesn't have enough money to lend. And so, but they're still putting pressure on people.
Oh, please.
I'm like, defaulted what? Pay back. Yeah. They didn't fund the loan.
God.
Yeah. Defaulted returning payment for something that no one gave you. Like, that's crazy. So I think it's nuts. And like, this is starting to feel like 2008.
Yeah.
Like, it's starting to feel like the financial institutions don't actually have the money that, like, or the lenders, right? We're not doing banks now, but with the lenders, don't actually have the money that they committed. And then that means that we're going to start looking to insurance. And who knows if insurance has the money that is needed. Those claims all go at once. Like, that's going to be a big ass problem again.
Well, I had some discussions recently about sending people home where your work comp policy has been rated and written to be in a building. And somebody quipped, well, how could you get hurt at home? I said, well, you're walking down the stairs talking on your phone to your manager and you fall. You're going to make a claim for that. And Heather and I used to do some of this employment law, and they figured out at some point, but the insurance companies had a pool of money. And they've written that for a certain risk. And if you read the declarations and exclusions part, which not everybody does, you can see how they want to stream their liability in a certain path. But all of a sudden, everything's changed. And what you used to do is now being done by delivery, so you can make money. And oh, by the way, you're going to cover me, right? And I used to do the insurance side of the civil litigation. And we haven't even begun to see the shit sandwiches that are coming from what we have to do to hunker down for COVID, make money. And then when we come out of that, no one's written policies for this risk, and insurance makes money by not paying on risks.
You know what's so crazy? I just renewed a manufacturing license, and they kicked back my quality was either quality control or security SOP, and wanted me to discuss hygiene and infectious disease prevention. So I did. I wrote an SOP for it, but that was something that I was not expecting. But it's so relevant right now and so important for them to understand. I mean, all kinds of weird shit too. Complaints. Someone just told me at a dispensary that their employee was out. Their kid was sick, high fever, shortness of breath, blah blah blah. Brought in for COVID testing, and so the manager said, "Cool, you can come back to work, but I need your doctor to clear you that you don't have COVID or that your child did not have COVID. I need to see that negative test result because 5 days ago you said that was the reason you couldn't come to work is because you thought your kid had COVID. So what has changed?" And if you got the test done, then we need to see it, or a doctor's clearance note. They weren't demanding like a HIPAA violation, demanding a note from the doctor that this person is cleared and not infectious. You can return to work. When they returned to work, they returned with an absence verification, which is sort of the opposite of what we're looking for. We know that you needed to stay home. We want to know that you're okay to come back. Yes, the retailer.
Well, let me tell you my experience. I used to represent doctors, and an insurance company can handle a bad doctor better than the medical board can, because the insurance company is going to rate your risk. And I had a lot of surgeons. They had to have insurance to practice at some particular hospital, and if the hospital couldn't kick you off their staff, the insurance company said, "We're not going to write your policy." So next thing you know, you're cutting in Imperial Valley because you can't get insurance. And in this industry, as insurance companies really start looking at the risk, they're paying out on their policy now. The next time they're going to be smarter. They will do a lot more to rein in bad business practices than the state can ever do. But we just don't have enough policies yet, and there's lots of gaps still, lots of exclusions. I think all of this infectious disease now is excluded from these force majeures clauses and policies and in contracts.
Right? It's a pandemic.
Well, but when you read the language, it is it's covered what is included. They don't have the all-inclusive or anything else that's declared a public emergency. No, it's this list of things. If it ain't an earthquake or a hurricane or a riot, we don't cover. And there's a lot of insurance claims policies. The insurance commissioner put out a statement the other day that, let me remind all the claims handlers, we have claims handling statutes. You cannot refuse to take a claim or refuse to investigate it, because they were doing things like that. We don't care. We're not going to take it. We're not going to investigate. Wouldn't even investigate. So the insurance commissioner went so far as to say, here's what you have to do. Don't have somebody call me and tell me they won't do it. And that's a problem.
The litigator in me just like got a little hungry.
Well, if you don't have an admitted carrier, you lose some of your stick to go after them.
Yeah.
But we don't have too many. So the insurance is a whole nother milieu, a whole nother huge shit sandwich that maybe we'll talk about it another time.
I know it's going to be interesting. I tell my clients always, like, they usually work with brokers, and I tell them you need to put it in writing that you want confirmation from the carrier that they know the exact business line that you're in, and that there is not an exclusion from coverage for engaging in that activity. Because my understanding is there are a lot of policies out there that have an exclusion for federal illegality, and that's a fucking problem, because you don't have coverage at the end of the day. And so, like, I tell my clients, and I'm like, and listen, God bless your broker for the job they do. I don't give a fuck what they say, though. I want it from the carrier themselves, because what will happen is the carrier will turn around and say, I don't.
Yeah. Well, and I've actually been in some of those bad faith cases where I represented one of the parties in it, and the decision's already made. So now you're sued, and you are screwed if you can't substantiate why you denied the claim. And California has some pretty strong bad faith requirements and case law. So that's another part of litigation that's coming. And, just there's so many pieces of your manufacturers are probably got the PPEs because they're thinking about not having rat turds and cat hairs in their, pieces of edibles. but it's hard to get good coverage for products liability recall coverage. And then you've got everybody that's on the hook because everybody gets sued, and then trying to figure out who's really on the risk for this, for the big part of the risk. I don't think that those cases have actually happened yet, but I've been in those rooms with 20, 30 defendants, and man, it's ugly.
Yeah, what's fucked is that one of my clients got sued. I don't want to litigate anymore, so I referred it out. They got sued for
Amen, sister.
It's so goddamn stressful, and yeah.
And I'm cranky. I say fuck in front of a judge. It's like, oh my God, sorry.
Never done that, but
I have, but I knew that someone was going to say that to the jury, so I started desensitizing them.
Yeah, it's rough. I just am over litigation. But anyways, it's a very interesting theory. It's a very interesting question, and I can't wait to see how it plays out. Because so it was for flour that was allegedly purchased at my client's shop, although they don't have a receipt, they paid cash, etc. But nevertheless, that client, it's for flour that tested for a couple, I don't even know if they're pesticides, they're just chemicals, I guess, and they tested well within the legal limits. So there were 3 of them that tested. So the limit was 3 parts per million, and the flour had 0.24 parts per million. Another one was 10, and it had 1 point something, and another one was 10 and it had 3. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, this COA that your client's relying on, because they took the flour independently themselves to a lab to test, which I also think is like weird, like who has their flour 6 months later and goes and tests it, but whatever, they did. And I'm like, based on these labs, we're within the legal limits. So I don't know how that works in products liability. If any exposure is an issue, or if there's an accepted limit, then and you're within it, then the consumer should assume the risk.
Well, and there are some safe havens for some categories of damage that it doesn't matter if it tests out this is something that made somebody sick, but everybody gets sucked into those kinds of suits, and when they do happen, we will begin to see the big gaps in coverage, how stupid people are when they really don't write an SOP to cover what you should be expecting to come, because products liabilities didn't get invented yesterday. We have a particular type of widget, and the widget goes to consumers and they can get hurt. And if you're not planning on what happens when that comes down, and then insure for it and make sure that the insurance broker knows what you're doing and what the risk is. I mean, as long as an insurance company's paying the attorney's bills, they'll keep fighting. But it's the uninsured loss that I tell my clients, look, I'm expensive. Pay the money now because it's cheaper. When you're bleeding and you need me, if you don't pay my bills, I'm sorry. I went to prison for this shit. I need to make money, and I do a lot of pro bono work, but that's not what my fee agreement says. We will find out some things here.
I tell my clients all the time, and I tell people whenever I'm like in public settings too, like, you don't have to hire me, hire the business attorney down the street from you and use a cannabis specialist for an hour to take a look. Like, I tell people that all the time. Like, if you don't want to pay my rate, that's fine. Go find a run-of-the-mill contract attorney that can go look at something for you and hash out the basics. And then when you need the cannabis spin, come back to me, pay me for an hour. You're 1,000, maybe 2 in. Trust me, that's going to be the best money you've ever spent. Like,
exactly.
These women that I know down here in Orange County and sort of the Canna Mom crew, right? Like those of us that are trying to break the stigma, make it more normal. We all drink in front of our kids. I'm not saying what. I'm not saying blow smoke in your kid's fucking face, but my kid definitely knows that there's weed in this house. Like there's
yeah.
And so we're trying, so a lot of them are, looking at, they're younger, they've got entrepreneurial spirits. And they carry around their $3,000 Louis Vuitton bags. And then I tell them, you should hire a business attorney to look at your contracts for all these events you're doing. And are you collecting sales tax? And are you doing all these things? And they just look at me and their eyes glaze over. I'm like, I don't have $500. I'm like, well, you have a $3,000 fucking purse on your arm.
Yeah.
Priority straight, sweetie.
Well, listen, I'm real blunt with them. My worth is my time and my experience. And if I decide to give you my time, cool. But when I don't, then, don't hire me, because I'm pretty blunt. And if you don't like me, I don't give two shits. I ain't trying to be pretty for you. I tell you how I see it, and I don't know everything. And I'm expensive too. And if you don't like it, because I send people to business litigators all the time, and I'm the cannabis voice for them. Hey, I'll be happy to fill in that gap. The rest of this, your widget is cannabis. But, CEOs lose businesses all the time. Ain't brand new. Businesses fail regularly and for predictable reasons. It ain't just all about cannabis, but hey, I can help you do that too.
Yeah.
Dana, thank you so much.
Well,
next time we have to tip a glass. I'm a whiskey guy myself, but we'll figure it out, and we'll go from there. Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks.
I know. Go jump in your pool. Okay.